Today we delve into the intersections of fate and choice as we explore the tragic circumstances surrounding Boeing whistleblowers and their untimely fates. Was this a sinister orchestration, or a reflection of universal struggles such as depression, sadness, and other loss of purpose? In a world of aviation, mortality touches us all, yet some meet it prematurely, while others find themselves entangled in situations that curtail their lives, a departure from mere chance to deliberate extinguishing of existence. Welcome to Destination Aviation. Well, welcome back, everyone, to the podcast. I know it's been not as long as last time, but a little bit long. I had some vacation time and stuff lined up, went up to Michigan. So I was a little bit out of sorts in the sense of I wasn't sitting here doing this podcast. But now I am. I'm sitting in front of my bay window, actually, right now, watching rain come down. Because it definitely looks like, well, maybe not an IFR day, just the rain. It looks like the clouds are still high, but it definitely is a good amount of rain. I don't know if you would, I personally wouldn't want to necessarily be up in it, but you could. Doesn't look like it's too windy, and it doesn't look like the clouds are hanging too low, and it doesn't look like thunderstorms either, so we're all good checking off there. As you probably heard at the beginning of the episode here, we're going to talk a little bit more about Boeing and some of the tragic incidences that surrounding their whistleblowers. I mean, Boeing just can't seem to catch a break lately. You keep hearing about these nonstop stories of, aircraft depressurization, cowlings falling off, etc. If you haven't, one of our episodes, episode 23, Clear Skies, Dark Shadows, the 737 MAX Chronicle. That is an episode where we went over some of the plight of the MAX aircraft and some of the issues that they had and unfortunate circumstances surrounding those crashes. But as we looked further into some of the details of that episode, obviously one of the interesting components is this whistleblower concept where the whistleblowers are dying. And so we'll get a little bit into that as we go through the episode. As you know, we always like to talk a little bit about other stuff up front because I love to talk about other stuff. And so other stuff being, let's see. Well, do you know somebody's actually collecting barf bags on airplanes? I guess out of the 8 billion people in the world, there are at least 100 people that collect vomit bags off of aircraft. So some of these collectors are so big into barf bags, they actually got barf bag on their license plate. The barf bag itself was introduced by Gilmore Schleichendel, the native North Dakotan, was an industrial design giant who specialized in bags and plastic linings. In 1949, they created the Harmonious Union of Two, a discrete plastic lined bag for motion sickness, right? So you think about the invention of the aircraft and everything of the sorts that went along with that, the magical, mysterious advantage of flight. And then, of course, then you go to, well, people are going to get sick and throw up all over the plane, at least some of them. The term barf bag sounds so undignified, but the alternatives aren't much of an improvement. Comfort bag is cloaked in euphemism. Sickness bag lacks charm. The significantly sanitized emesis bag, perhaps too formal for the occasion. Barf bag it is. It's evocative and memorable. A bit like the good old barf bag itself. So when you're out traveling around, or the next time you're on an airplane and you decide to maybe go past the Sky Mall, you tuck that barf bag into your bag and move on through your flight. I will say, though, if you're flying on maybe like a Spirit Airlines or something like that, chances are the next person in is going to be barfing all over the floor, because I highly doubt, I've been on those turns when they turn those planes around, and I don't think anybody's checking the back of those seat pockets. And I've been in this industry so long now that it always is interesting to me when there is aircraft retirements that have been around pretty much since my existence into it, one of these being the CRJ-200. Air Canada officially retired their last CRJ-200. When I worked in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, these used to come in from Canada. International service in Pittsburgh never really worked too well after the dehubbing days. They've lost a lot of service there, unfortunately for them. But they keep trying. But in this case, they won't be seeing the CRJ-200s flying anymore because they are now out the door. This aircraft was nearly 20 years old. which was generally configured for 50-seat passengers. And obviously, the airlines always want to make more money off of their flights. And so the more seats they can put on, the less relevant the CRJ-200 became. For the rest of Air Canada's fleet, it's comprised of 102 aircraft, including 35 CRJ-900s, 39 Q400s, and 25 E-175s, which E-175 is actually a pretty nice airplane. I've been on them with JetBlue, so if you haven't been on E-175, I highly recommend it. There was an article that came out basically talking about Southwest Airlines and that it might be in somewhat financial trouble. I actually knew someone who worked on a C-suite level at Southwest. They no longer work there. I think maybe they got wrapped up into this whole financial situation and removing of staff. From their LinkedIn posts, it seemed like most of the time they spent with Flava Flav or going to events like the Kentucky Derby. I never quite figured out what he did for Southwest, but he looked like he would be a great party planner or party attender, maybe is the better phrase there. But the new group of investors, one of these investors has $2 billion invested in the airline. They want Bob Jordan, who's the current CEO, replaced. And they also want, it sounds like it wasn't completely released, but for checked baggage to be charged for. As you know, of the four major airline carriers, United, American, Delta, and Southwest. Southwest was the only domino not to fall in line with the other three and start charging for bags, which, back in the day, it was just a given that you got a free check bag, and then these things start to erode and change. And now if you take a bag, you have to pay for it. And if you're on an ultra low-cost carrier, unless you're bringing along maybe like a thong or maybe a Speedo, you're probably going to have to check it. So beyond those couple of items, those airlines will charge you for anything. They'll probably be at some point where they try to charge you for a lavatory. We'll find out if they ever get to that. Ryanair, jokingly enough about it, has mentioned that in the past, maybe a coin-operated door. But regardless, it looks like Southwest. Who knows? They painted on their planes and stuff. I remember back in the day, bags will always fly free here. I haven't seen that as much lately. Actually, I haven't seen it at all. So maybe they've gotten rid of that livery on the side of the airplane. And who knows, maybe at some point here, we'll all be paying for our bags on Southwest Airlines. What you think is always standard isn't. They've also even talked about getting rid of the A, B, and C check-in process. I know my own mother, I've talked to her multiple times about this, and she doesn't understand. She goes, I don't get it. A and B and C, what does C stand for? Well, C stands for center. If you're in the C boarding group, you're going to be in the middle seat, so I hope your arm mates are phenomenal because normally they're a pain in the ass. But they're talking about getting rid of that too and actual individual seat tickets like you would get on other airlines. So find out what happens with Southwest. I'm not too much of a Southwest flyer. I've been on them multiple times as everybody else, but lately I've been kind of sticking to United. Was American, but United for now. So who knows? We ebb and flow on these things, and at the end of the day, you just want somebody to get you where you're going, right? So we talked about the Canadian aircraft CRJ-200 that went into the abyss, into the pasture, off into no man's land, into the desert, never to be seen from again. Now, Lockheed Martin's the Hercules. Now, that's a different story. The KC-130 is still up and flying and actually just delivered its 2,700th KC-130J Super Hercules aircraft. It is this one in particular was delivered to the U.S. Marine Corps Aerial Refueling Transport Squadron 252 of the Main Corps Air Station at Cherry Point, North Carolina. Workhorse of the military. It is great seeing these things. I love seeing them in the sky. I'm actually going to be heading up to Oshkosh for a day. My first time at Oshkosh, I have for somehow avoided it. Not unintended, but have avoided it for all my career. So I'm looking forward to actually getting on the ground up there, exploring and kind of understanding what Oshkosh is, since everybody always tells me, you've never been to Oshkosh. And come the end of this month, I no longer will be able to say that. And I will report back here on this channel so everybody can hear about the festivities that I had at Oshkosh. Maybe that would include eating a hot dog, staring at an airplane, talking to somebody. Who knows? Maybe I'll even hand out a Destination Aviation podcast sticker. But I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to getting up there and seeing everybody. And who doesn't love Wisconsin in the summer? Not as great as as Michigan. Maine, I'm not sure. I've never actually been to Maine in the summer. But for all of you that are upset over Wisconsin versus Michigan, sorry, I grew up in Michigan, so it is what it is. But I do love Wisconsin. So, I'm looking forward to that. That should be a good time. I will actually be traveling up there with a historian in aviation. He writes books on aviation in the Chicago region. So looking forward to having conversations with him about things that we talk about very much on this podcast, things in our industry and what we hold near and dear to our heart. So it's going to be a good time. If there's anybody that's actually listening to this podcast that is going to be going up to Oshkosh, feel free to drop me a line at dapodcast85@gmail.com. All right, I want to talk about one last story here. And, honestly, in my job, I read so much about aviation. I deal so much with aviation day to day that I honestly could talk forever about stories and what's going on. I mean, every given day, there's something else coming out that's cool, interesting, or frustrating, whatever it might be to talk about. But in this case, it's kind of cool. It's the first Air Force One. Anybody in aviation has the iconic Air Force One shot. I actually had the privilege of getting on Air Force One, an active Air Force One, when President Obama flew into an airport I was working at, and I worked with the Secret Service and the Air Force One crew members, which obviously is part of the Air Force, to help work the aircraft operation at the airport. And then because I worked with them so closely, they were able to get me actually onto the aircraft. So I have the obligatory shot that everybody in aviation does of being near Air Force One. And then also, of course, I have an Air Force One airplane model, because what good aviation enthusiast would I be if I wasn't? And actually, our number one fan just gave me a ornament that has Santa Claus writing on Air Force One. So that's actually pretty freaking cool, I have to say so myself. But the first Air Force One was flown by President Eisenhower, and it was nearly abandoned and forgotten. It was a Lockheed Constellation. When Dynamic Aviation's team got to the boneyard, Columbine 2, which was the name of this Air Force One, was not even tied down. Dust covered, the aluminum still caught the Arizona sun. It was sitting at Marana Regional Airport, or AVQ, said Brad Holliday, maintenance manager for the first Air Force One restoration project. Not on the ramp, it was pushed back into the sand with some other derelicts. Columbine 2 was a name given to the 1948 Lockheed Constellation by First Lady Mamie Eisenhower. The Constellation flew President Dwight D. Eisenhower, the first family, his staff, and visiting dignitaries from 1952 to 1954. The first airplane to be designated as Air Force One. When the Dynamics team found it in 2015, the aircraft was nearly forgotten. Retired by the military in 1968, the presidential airplane was purchased with 4 other retired Constellation for forestry spraying in the Canadian Rockies. So that's interesting. We're just talking about the CRJ-200. This aircraft went from being the original Air Force One to being sold to another country. For many years, this was considered the lost Air Force One. It was never outfitted with tanks, but used as part of the sprayers for the Canadians, and that was parked for 25 years after. A call from the Smithsonian in 1980 stopped the airplane from being scrapped, and it was briefly made flyable again for Eisenhower's 100th birthday commemoration in 1991. Then it was nearly forgotten again. This is crazy. They got it flying, and then it was nearly forgotten again in the desert. It was said by Holliday when he first got to inspect it, he crawled into the number 1 engine and was surprised he found a bird's nest. That's not surprising. I've found raccoons in a 727 before. But those are nature's bandits. Some interesting factoids here is when Dwight D. Eisenhower was president, he flew 63,000 miles on this Constellation. He flew to Europe, Canada, Mexico, and across most of our country. And here's an interesting thought. I did not know this, but the Douglas aircraft was flying in 1954 And up until 1954, it was referred to, the tail number was November 8610. So they were referring to it as Air Force 8610, whether the president was on board or not. It was on a flight from Charlotte, North Carolina, back to Washington, D.C. that inspired the adaptation of the famous call sign. Eisenhower was returning from a speech, and in the airspace over Richmond, Virginia, controllers were getting calls from both Air Force 8610 and Eastern Airlines Flight 8610. After landing back in Washington, Eisenhower's pilot, Colonel William Draper, called a meeting to always identify the flight carrying a president. It would be Air Force One. So as far as the restoration itself, shortly after arriving in Arizona, they realized the Air Force One could be made flyable again. Finally, a year later, in March of 2016, the crew had logged time and constellations for agricultural spraying, flew the airplane to Bridgewater, Virginia. The Dynamic Aviation team and staff of technicians is redoing wiring, updating the hydraulics, replacing cabin interiors that were originally made of wood, so the aircraft meets modern safety standards. They said they're working to restore the airplane so it looks as it did in 1953 as an operational, reliable aircraft that's safe to fly and easy to maintain. On the flight deck, both the original instrument panel will be replaced with modern glass avionics, but a fully accurate covering will also be made with steam gauges to the exact layout of the 1948 Constellation. The team was assisted by a large pool of volunteers, including retired Air Force technicians and local students. So this is a really cool story of getting this aircraft back up and running. Hopefully they'll be taking it around on tours. I don't actually see in here where it says that they're doing that, but kudos to them to getting some piece of history back up into the skies. All right, so we have gone through the gamut of news. Now it's time to get to the story of the hour, which is the Boeing whistleblowers and tragic deaths that surrounded their demise, and a little bit of Boeing history. We won't go through too much of it because you could go back to our episode 23 and listen to any of the history that you would like to there. I promise you I will be just as nasally in this episode as I was in that one. So feel free to jump back and listen to it. Otherwise, we're just going to jump into some of what's going on with these whistleblowers. So the beginning of 2024 hasn't been the most stellar for Boeing. It's included two whistleblowers who were raising issues about the company that died suddenly. The first of those that we'll talk about is John Barnett. Took his own life just days after testifying against the aircraft giant. And then more recently, two aircrafts have left passengers terrified after being thrown around through somersaults during brutal turbulence. So let's line up the timeline a little bit. On January 5th, Alaska Airlines Flight 1282, we spoke about this before, a 737 MAX 9 lost a door plug at 16,000 feet on flight from Portland, Oregon to Ontario, California. That part is designed to replace the unneeded emergency exit door and blew out within 20 minutes of takeoff. We talked about that before. We talked about my surprise that the emergency door was maybe not always needed, but go back and listen to that episode as well. So your assignment today is just go listen to all the other episodes. So the Federal Aviation Administration grounded 171 of the 737 MAX 9s. Which, of course, was the aftermath of that accident. Alaska Airlines and United Airlines also went on to find loose parts on their grounded jet door plugs. So January 16th of 2024, an anonymous whistleblower, rank and file, said that the door plug blowout was Boeing's fault, rather than supplier Spiro Aero Systems. First reported in the Seattle Times, they claim the fuselage panel was removed for repair, then reinstalled improperly at the Washington factory. At the time, the whistleblower said the reason the door blew off is stated in black and white in Boeing's own records, and they said that to the Liam News. They also said it is also very, very stupid and speaks volumes about the quality culture and certain portions of the business. On February 6th, the National Transportation Safety Board report said that the January 5th incident was down to 4 crucial bolts that were missing from which the panel blew out. On February 21st, Boeing's 737 MAX program chief Ed Clark was reportedly fired in a structural shakeup of the company. Clark was also general manager at the company's Renton, Washington facility and had been at Boeing for 18 years. He was replaced by Katie Riggingall, while a senior vice president of quality role was created too. On March 3rd, a United Airlines Boeing 737 MAX veered off the runway after landing in Houston due to some gear collapse. We talked about that. That seemed like it was an overrun. Another episode you can go back and look at. Yes. So much homework, but honestly, you're kind of cheating if you jumped right to this episode. So you need to go listen to the rest of them too. Plus, you don't know much about the host. Who knows all the cool stuff I could have said over basically the last year that you could really get to know me about. So go listen to it. On March 4th, an audit by the FAA of both Boeing and Spirit Aerosystems found multiple instances where the companies allegedly failed to comply with manufacturer quality control requirements. On March 6th, the head of the NTSB accused Boeing of not cooperating with its investigation into the January incident. Jennifer Homendy said investigators sought the names of 25 people who worked on door plugs at the Renton facility but had not received them from Boeing. She also told a Senate committee hearing it was absurd that 2 months later we don't have him. However, Boeing spokesman Connor Greenwood pushed back and insisted the names of the employees were provided early in the investigation. That same day, a 737 engine caught fire mid-air above Texas, causing an emergency landing minutes into its journey to Fort Myers, Florida. On March 7th, a wheel fell off a Boeing 777-200 shortly after takeoff from San Francisco Airport, crushing cars below. The plane, with 235 passengers and 14 crew, diverted to Los Angeles Airport after it was alerted of the landing gear failure and landed safely with no further incident and no injuries reported. March 9th, Boeing whistleblower John Barnett, 62, a former quality control manager and employee of 32 years, was found dead in his truck outside a South Carolina hotel days after testifying against the company in a lawsuit. The coroner put it down as self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head, though police confirmed that they would investigate it further. Barnett had made a string of complaints to his higher-ups in his time as quality control manager before leaving the company on health grounds in 2017. In January of 2024, he appeared on TMZ to say that the 737 MAX 9 aircraft was being launched back into the air soon in the wake of the accident, suggesting corners may have been cut. On March 11th, a Boeing 777 was forced to land due to hydraulic fluid spewing from its landing gear area. This aircraft was traveling from Sydney to San Francisco when the leaking started. On March 15th, a United Airlines 737 was grounded after it was found to be missing a panel after it touched down successfully in Medford Airport, Oregon, despite the missing part. On March 20th, a Boeing 737-900 bound for Atlanta was forced to turn back and make an emergency landing after an engine blowout from a takeoff in Aruba. Aruba. If you go back and listen, I know so many times I'm going to say this, but go back and listen to some other episodes. We went down and visited Aruba. It was a lot of fun. We actually met someone who was he claimed to be a pilot, and he's also putting pontoon boats into the ocean, which, if anybody knows anything about pontoon boats, that's not the best idea in the world. But more power to him. I hope he doesn't kill anybody on a pontoon boat. Maybe there's a podcast out there that talks about idiots in pontoon boats, and they can be featured on that. But on March 20th, that Delta airline flight circled the Caribbean island 4 times before coming back into land following that mechanical issue. The resort I stayed at would have been front and center, could have watched this whole thing happen. So go back and listen to that part of our podcast. On March 29th, United Airlines Flight 990, a Boeing 777-200 from San Francisco to Paris, had a touchdown early in Denver after engine problems. You know, we're talking a little bit about conspiracy theory. Let's talk about San Francisco Airport. They keep popping up here. What the heck's going on? As you know, I actually lived in a boat just south of San Francisco Airport for a couple of years. If you haven't, it's back in the episodes. Once again, this episode is going to be like one of those 1980s, 1990s sitcom themes where you hear the wind chimes and the harp playing, and it's just kind of a recap of everything we've done. And those were always kind of cheating episodes, weren't they? Because you're like, wait, they're just showing me parts of episodes I've already seen, while they sit at a table and be like, I remember that one time that Winston got a chicken and fell down the stairs. Yep. Here we are. Huh? All right. I digress, and I go way off in tangents. But yeah, San Francisco Airport. Let's throw that on the conspiracy list. Don't know what's going on there. April 4th, Alaska Airlines announced that they received $160 million in compensation from Boeing after the 737 MAX 9s were grounded following the January 5th door blowout. The amount was equal to the revenue lost according to a filing from the airline, but Alaska added that it anticipated receiving extra compensation too. On April 10th, another whistleblower, Sam Selfor, came forward to Boeing of taking shortcuts while building its 777 and 787 Dreamliner jets, and had added that the company retaliated against him when he raised concerns. He doubled down on the claims a week later, adding on NBC that the 787s should be grounded, fearing fatal flaws, which could cause all of them to fall apart in mid-air. In a 1,500-word statement, Boeing said that it's fully confident in its 787 and called concerns about structural integrity inaccurate. On April 11th, an internal Boeing review in response to the initial Wall Street Journal investigation found that CEO David Calhoun and other bosses at the aviation firm spent $500,000 on company private jets for personal trips which were improperly recorded as business travel. Boeing's review concluded that some of the flights taken by executives in 2021 and 2022 were not previously classified as prerequisites by the company. In the company's proxy filing on April 5th, Boeing said that these flights should have been classified as such in accordance with SEC rules and guidance. Boy, it seems like so many people get wrapped up in this flying private situation where they don't want to admit that they're actually flying private. I don't know if you remember Scott Kirby, another episode we talked about, but another episode we have where we talked about United Airlines' Scott Kirby. He got a lot of flack during the period where there was a lot of issues with United Airlines and getting passengers where they needed to go, and then it was revealed that he was flying private everywhere that he wanted to go. Don't get me wrong, flying private is probably the way to go. I mean, you'd have to be an idiot to be like, wait a minute, I could get on a plane by myself, or I could get crammed into the middle seat on Frontier Airlines. I think everybody would probably take the private jet. But unfortunately for these individuals, it gives them a little bit of an image issue. United Airlines on April 16th indicated it will reduce its reliance on Boeing after announcing a $124 million loss in the first quarter of 2024, which it blamed on the scandal-laden manufacturer. On April 24th, Boeing's CEO assured investors after a first quarter loss of $355 million, which was announced by coincidence of a 6% dip in share prices. Calhoun added that as a successor was lined up for his departure at the end of 2024, who would come from the inside of the company. On April 26, Delta Airlines Flight 520 was forced to make an emergency landing at the JFK airport when an emergency slide fell off the Boeing 767 an hour into its journey into Los Angeles. FAA records indicated that this plane was 33 years old. Nutty thing about this April 26th incident, this slide actually floated up to an attorney's house that was representing some of the Boeing people in the plug door incident, actually washed up to his home. Again, that's in another episode if you go back and listen. I feel like we actually do a pretty good job of covering the news in this podcast because everything that I've been able to find and research on this incident leads us back to another episode. On April 30th, we saw the second whistleblower, Joshua Dean, died suddenly at age 45, having raised an alarm about supposed defects in the 737 MAX jets. The former Spirit employee previously said that he was fired from his quality control role for questioning standards at the supplier plant in Wichita, Kansas in October of 2022. His family said on social media that Dean died in the hospital after a sudden illness. Earlier in 2024, Dean spoke to NPR about being fired. He said, "I think you were sending out a message to anybody else. If you are too loud, he will silence you," he said. On May 22nd, a 73-year-old British man was killed on a Boeing 777-300 extended range after extreme turbulence caused pandemonium in the cabin, forcing pilots to make an emergency landing. The aircraft journey from London to Singapore with 221 passengers as well as 18 crew members descended 6,000 meters in 5 minutes. The brutal turbulence caused pure chaos in the cabin with some blacking out after getting thrown around. Jeffrey Kitchen, 73, who was traveling with his son for a wedding abroad, suffered a fatal heart attack during the ordeal, while 7 others were fighting for their lives. Upwards of 80 people were injured during extreme turbulence, which left the cabin showered in debris and terrified passengers desperately trying to stop blood flowing from several cuts and blunt force issues. We've seen a lot of turbulence. We've talked about this in some of the other episodes. I'd say maybe less of a Boeing issue and more of a, I don't know, actually, I don't want to say coincidence, but it seems like a lot of it too is happening international. You hear PIREP or pilot report conditions, talking about turbulence, talking about issues. It's interesting. And I know that I have seen some of the articles also that, they're taking, regulators are taking a heavier look at turbulence in general. But on May 26, 8 people were taken to the hospital and 12 people injured after a Qatar Airways flight experienced extreme turbulence on an approach to Dublin Airport. Terrified passengers detailed how flight attendants were tossed around, hitting the ceiling of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. So again, a second turbulence issue just happened to be on a Boeing aircraft. There were others too that were Airbus, to be fair, as we go down the coincidence road. So we're there. Boeing is actually going to buy Spirit Aerosystems. I think it's around a $4 billion deal, but they've been brokering that. That's part of their plan to get the company back on the right track. But let's talk a little bit about the 2 whistleblowers that passed away. So John Barnett was an American whistleblower. He was known for his substantial safety and quality reports to the Federal Aviation Administration about Boeing's production of the 787 Dreamliner. His death, which occurred amidst a lawsuit he brought against Boeing. Barnett worked as a quality control in Boeing for 32 years, serving for 7 as a manager in the North Charleston, South Carolina area. Barnett was one of several employees to go public about malpractices at Boeing, and was featured in the 2022 Netflix documentary Downfall, the case against Boeing. During his time in South Carolina, Barnett documented and reported several safety and quality control issues to Boeing and the FAA. Boeing's own internal investigations corroborated his complaints about manufacturing emergency oxygen systems, and in 2017, the FAA ordered remedial actions in regards to complaints about non-conforming parts and metal shavings. Barnett subsequently filed a whistleblower complaint with OSHA under the FAA's Whistleblower Protection Program, which was closed by OSHA in favor of Boeing after a 4-year investigation in 2021. In 2021, Barnett and his attorneys appealed the decision and amended the original complaint, alleging that the companies undermined his career because he had raised safety concerns, which Boeing has denied. As of March 12th, the whistleblower case against Boeing was pending and to be continued under his estate. So as we know, he talked about, he has passed away. In March 2024, after he failed to report for his 3rd day of deposition, he was found dead of a gunshot wound. The Charleston County coroner described the wound as self-inflicted. A conspiracy theory that Boeing assassinated him spread amongst the public. Video surveillance and other evidence examined by the Charleston Police Department showed that Barnett's cause of death was suicide by firearm, caused by a period of serious personal distress related to his participation in the whistleblower case. Now, before I go down the road of the conspiracy theory on this, I want to talk about Josh Dean, Joshua Dean, is a former quality control auditor for Boeing under the supplier Spirit Aerosystems, and one of the first whistleblowers to allege Spirit leadership had ignored manufacturing defects on the 737 MAX. Now, this obviously is a different aircraft. What Barnett was talking about was the 787 Dreamliner. In Josh Dean's case, Josh is referring to, obviously, the 737 MAX issues. And for Josh's side of things, he died of a fast-spreading infection. Known, obviously, as Josh Dean, he lived in Wichita, Kansas, where Spirit is based. He was 45 and had been in good health and was noted for having a healthy lifestyle. He died after 2 weeks in critical condition, his aunt Carol Parsons said. Spirit spokesperson Joe Pizzuto said, "Our thoughts are with Josh Dean's family. The sudden loss is stunning news here for his loved ones." Dean had given a deposition in a Spirit shareholder lawsuit and also filed a complaint with the Federal Aviation Administration alleging serious and gross misconduct by senior quality management of the 737 product line at Spirit. Spirit fired Dean in April of 2023, and he had filed a complaint with the Department of Labor alleging that his termination was retaliation concerns related to aviation safety. Parsons said Dean became ill and went to the hospital because he was having trouble breathing just over 2 weeks ago. He was intubated and developed pneumonia and then a serious bacterial infection, MRSA. His condition deteriorated rapidly and he was airlifted from Wichita to a hospital in Oklahoma City, Parsons said. There he was put on an ECMO machine, which circulates oxygenates in patients' bloods outside of the body, taking over heart and lung functions when a patient's organs don't work on their own. On April 30th, Josh Dean passed away from his brief illness. So now it's time of the episode where we talk about the conspiracy theories. So we've been deep diving into this for about the last half hour. The conspiracy theories surrounding Boeing are nothing short of crippling. As we know, this started with Timothy Barnett's tragic death, which sparked a storm of speculation. According to a close friend, Barnett had confided, "If anything happens to me, it's not suicide." The statement fueled suspicions that his death, initially ruled as suicide, was staged to appear that way. Adding to the intrigue, Barnett's lawyer and family vehemently disputed Boeing's innocence, citing his upbeat demeanor and determination to confront the company in court, what they described as a toxic work environment. They blamed Boeing for deteriorating his mental health, including PTSD and anxiety attacks. Then, as we know, in May 2024, the plot thickened yet again when Joshua Dean, who is represented by Barnett's attorney, that part we didn't add in earlier, tragically passed away due to his health complications. His concerns about safety issues at Spirit Aerosystems, a Boeing subcontractor, had been well documented. Dean's death reignited online speculation of conspiracy theories, despite most dismissing them as unfounded. In the aftermath, more whistleblowers from both Boeing and Spirit Aerosystems have stepped forward, corroborating similar allegations. Amidst the controversy, Santiago Padres, another Spirit whistleblower, we talked about him in the timeline, downplayed the conspiracy theories, underscoring the complexities of competing narratives at play. These incidents continue to raise profound questions about corporate responsibility, whistleblower protection, and the broader implications for safety and accountability within the aerospace system. It is a compelling and troubling story that demands obviously close attention and scrutiny. And I am going to say it took a lot for me to get that out for some reason. It was a tongue twister. I had to re-record that several times. You didn't get to hear the expletives that came out of my mouth. My own conspiracy theory there is that I couldn't get the mush out of my mouth to get that sentence out of there. I don't know what the hell that was about. But if you do go back and listen to other episodes, you're going to get to hear lots of that. So I appreciate it. But no, so I would love to hear what you guys have to say out there about conspiracy theories with Boeing, with Spirit Aerosystems. What do you think? A bunny rabbit just jumped into the front yard here and it's staring at me. That's another conspiracy theory. Maybe he's listening. Maybe he has some intent with his ears. I'm going to take a live action shot here and I'm going to post this on our Instagram so everybody could see, because it does look like he's trying to get his ears into a corporate microphone in my face. Oh, it's unique. So this is going to go on the Instagram. So those people that do listen to the podcast, you'll know what it means, because usually it is an airplane photo, but you're going to say, and there might be still be an airplane photo in there, but we're definitely going to add this rabbit who appears to be the first sneaky listener to this podcast before it's even produced. But no, I would love to hear, besides the rabbit's thoughts, what everybody on this podcast thinks. Shoot me an email at dapodcast85@gmail.com. My overarching thought on this, someone told me recently that is my phrase, overarching thought. I'm going to take that too, because it's a good phrase. My overarching thought on this one is, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot. And Boeing, it's when there's a lack of answers in life and a lack of knowing, I think a lot of times people tend to fill in what they prefer to see as, possible connections. I am not one to say there is not things in this world that happens that we don't know about. But in the absence of concrete absolution, what do we have to go with, right? So you do end up being in a conspiracy theory world. But I would say kudos to both of these gentlemen for raising safety concerns, for making flying safer. And I do hope that Boeing gets all their stuff together. Well, formerly being in Chicago, was in Seattle, their former headquarters here. Now they've moved, I think, Virginia. I would love to see, an American company continue to succeed in the reputation that Boeing has had. There's some funny stuff that John Oliver just did on Last Week Tonight. I think it was a few months ago, about Boeing and Boeing's culture, which if you need some comedic relief, I would suggest go and watching that. But as far as conspiracy theories on this, like I said, I'd love to hear what you guys have to say, so feel free to drop me a message on it. The podcasting does take a lot. You have to find a quiet area and dedicate yourself to it. Even this podcast, I've been ebbing and flowing throughout the day just to try to get it in there. And now I see that the sun is starting to potentially set. Going into a work week, maybe go for a bike ride tonight. I'm going to hope to get this podcast up on the website so you all can take a look at it. If any of you are going to be in Oshkosh, feel free to drop me an email. But until next time, my friends, you stay safe out there, and I will see you down the runway.